I think my time's up.
3 minutes as well for you, sir.
America used to be loved in the Arab world, especially after World War II. First of all, we have the legacy. We're the first country to successfully declare independence from the British Empire. And there are a lot of people all around the world who really like that. And they like the promise of the American dream and individual liberty. For some reason, I'm not sure, they like our music. They like our movies. They like our technology. What they don't like is foreign occupation. And this barely got a mention earlier, but the real elephant in the room is American support for Israel. And that is what motivates anger toward the American people or toward this country, especially toward our government around that part of the world. I expect that the next president will be tested by terrorism and that he will fail the test, just as George Bush has done, that he will continue to follow the script that bin Laden has laid out for him. John McCain has made no secret how much he wants to bomb Iran, which is, of course, exactly what Ayman al-Zawahiri wants and has said so, a war between the United States and Iran. In 2006, bin Laden put out a podcast. He said, beware, the Americans, they're coming to Somalia and they're coming to Sudan. So what Bush do? He waited about 6 months and then he hired the Ethiopian army to invade Somalia and turn that land, which was actually just finally beginning to calm down after 20 years of warfare, back into hell on earth. It's funny. America is not an empire, and yet somehow we have a border conflict with Russia? Let me think about that. Even at this university, I bet most people, well, maybe in the last month you found out, but I bet most of you didn't even know where Georgia was, nestled in there between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea before this war in the last month. And yet somehow this is your vital interest. John McCain, Barack Obama, and Dick Cheney are all sworn to bring Georgia into NATO, to give them a war guarantee that if Russia ever crosses that border again, that we are all willing to go to war with Russia over Georgia? Yes, they're testing us. They're seeing, let's see, the Americans have overextended their empire just about as far as it can go. Let's see what happens. And they took advantage. Of course, it was Georgia who started the war by invading South Ossetia first, but the Russians took advantage of it and took it as an opportunity to test America. And the fact of the matter is, who cares if we fail the test, which we did because we can't do anything to the Russians. They have thousands of nuclear weapons, and we did fail the test. John McCain and Dick Cheney gave strong statements, but they're not doing anything. They can't. And it seems to me that the test is the limits. What are the limits of the American empire? Well, apparently we can't go north of the Caucasus Mountains. We might not even last to the south of them.
If you would please direct your question to one or both of the speakers. Go ahead.
My question is for Dr. Kushner. In hearing that there would be a debate on terrorism, I wanted to bring up the idea, the concept of blowback, and that role in what happened on September 11th. I didn't expect you to bring it up for me. But what my question is how do you concede when you talked about our support for the Mujahideen and you talked about blowback, how that had a role in what happened on 9/11, how do you reconcile that with supporting an invasion of Iraq, which could most likely cause much more blowback, and which we know that is causing terrorist recruitment to increase? It's easy to tell someone that an invading force is coming, so you should join us, the extremists, to try to kick them out of your country. So that was my question.
Okay, and it's a good question, and I think there's a rather simple answer to it. Let me just go back to blowback. The United States wanted to do anything it could to bring the Soviet Union to its feet. I mean, everybody understands that. So we supported the Mujahideen with weaponry. We built them the Bat Cave so that they could withstand Soviet carpet bombing. And then eventually, Mujahideen got out of control, and they came back at the United States. I mean, we know that to be the fact. The question is, did the United States know at the time would they have supported them the same way? You know, probably not, but we didn't. So that is historical. That's what happened, and friends of mine in the CIA and anybody will tell you that that's what occurred. The other question you had, which is an interesting one, you said, by us going into Iraq, right? By us going into Iraq, could that cause significant blowback? That was the question. My answer to that is, yes, it could, but it's not. And let me tell you why it's not going to. We didn't have a chance. I thought one of the questions would be here about the surge. The surge is working. The surge is working in the most miraculous ways you could imagine. The number of killings is down. Our troops are safer than they ever were. In fact, there are more people killed on the road, in any given month than our troops in that area of the world. And the reason for it is the United States has developed a technique in dealing with the surge that I can't discuss, and some others have some idea what it's about. It relates to human intelligence gathering and technology in which we could neutralize the enemy. I mean, people here should understand that why the surge is working is because the bad guys who are out there who want to kill Americans are being taken out. We've been able to destroy al-Qaeda's presence, very much so, inside of Iraq, significantly so. And it continues to go that way. And that's why the surge is absolutely working. And so the question is, we've been able to take out those leaders who would blow back in our face through the techniques we use in fighting the surge. And so I don't think it's the same problem as the mujahideen who we unleashed in Afghanistan and other regions of the world when we supported their fight against the Soviets. So I think we've become much more sophisticated in being able to deal with that. And I don't think it's going to be the same problem. I think we have al-Qaeda on the run inside of Iraq, not necessarily inside of Afghanistan, and not necessarily inside of Pakistan, and not necessarily inside this country. But certainly when it comes to the Iraqi playing field, the surge is a very important technique that has benefited us in not allowing blowback to occur in the future, both inside of Iraq and against the United States assets, both here and abroad.
Do we have a next question?
Yeah, my question is actually for both of y'all. I got here like 15 minutes late, so I don't know if you asked this as the first question or something, but if you had been in a position to direct America's actions after September 11th, what specifically would you have done differently and why?
We'll start with Mr. Horton.
I once asked Harry Brown, who ran for president as the Libertarian candidate in the year 2000, that question. He gave a pretty good answer. He said, well, I'd flip right to the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, the power of the Congress to issue letters of marque and reprisal. It's not that big of a deal. It's basically a license to kill, not for the killer, but for the killee. It's a license to kill that guy. This is the constitutional, believe it or not, our founders thought of this and put it right in the Constitution. This is how our national government is to bring violence to groups that are less than states, like pirates or what have you from their time. Well, Al-Qaeda has never been more than a couple of thousand people in the whole world, including Al-Qaeda in Iraq at its heyday a couple of years back. And what our government has done is say, wow, we're faced with this giant Islamo-fascist caliphate, this Osama bin Laden Soviet that's going to take over the whole world if we can't stop them. Meanwhile, these people have only ever been able to exist in stateless areas, like in Waziristan and formerly in Anbar province. And in fact, I'm glad that Harvey brought up the surge and its so-called success. The success of the surge basically is due to the fact that the Iraqi Sunnis who had tolerated al-Qaeda in Iraq's presence only to help fight the occupation, finally turned on them and got sick of them. Remember now, there were no al-Qaeda in Iraq before the war at all. For years and years, they tore human beings' lives apart with their suicide bombs in that country. But then at the beginning of 2006, the local Sunnis got sick and tired of al-Qaeda. They had tried to create what was called the Islamic State in Iraq, as though a bunch of Saudis and Egyptians were going to come and create the new Sunni government in that country. And so the Sunnis turned on them and went to war against them. The surge policy was announced 11 months later, and yet the escalation of troops gets all the credit for the Sunni insurgency basically deciding that since they lost the civil war against the Shiites for Baghdad, that they would go ahead and accept American money and ceasefire and go to war against al-Qaeda in Iraq. This ought to prove even more that even among the Sunni population in Iraq, even while occupied by foreign fighters, people hate al-Qaeda.